Hello, Sam. Hey, finally we meet.
We do, don't we?
Yeah.
Ah, there we go.
Hi, who's that? Steve.
Hello.
Hi, Steve.
Steve, hello, how are you doing?
All right. Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Well, as good as you
Yeah.
can be in the middle of a fucking global pandemic.
Yeah, I know, all things considered, as global pandemics go, I'm doing pretty well.
It's managed to take a global pandemic to get this thing on track. So, at least there's been some good things about the global pandemic, I think.
Always some good things about the global pandemic. Yeah, for sure. I tell you what, let me pour my dark coat. Oh, there it is. Right. How are you guys?
Yeah, all good. I'm busier than ever, really, weirdly. There's obviously lots of people very bored at home wanting to do guitar stuff.
Yeah, I've always wanted to redo my pedal board, or try out some new strings of something or another.
Yeah, exactly.
My husband has completely reset his studio into my son's bedroom. My son's got like one of those not bunk beds, like loft beds.
The cabin bed thing, yeah.
Exactly. So as soon as he got whiff of the fact that he might not be able to go out, he bolted to the studio, got all of his essentials. And, he's paying my son £50 a month. So Phoenix is happy. He's 10.
Nice. Yeah, that's...
Ben's happy.
There you go.
That's hilarious. That's forethought. And is there any productivity coming out of the bedroom studio?
There is definitely a sense of man cave about it.
Man cave.
In terms of productivity, I do hear the odd instrument being played, yeah.
Obviously, in terms of productivity, I don't just mean smell. Because I'm sure there's...
He's only sharing it with a 10-year-old boy. I don't think any of them give a shit.
Well, thanks for coming on the podcast.
That's all right.
So, for people who don't know who you are, well, from what I know, you managed Razorlight at one point, right? And a few other things, and you've also started with a few other people, musician support, which was
music support.
Music support.
Yeah, charity. Yeah. Did that. Yeah.
And also now you do consulting within the music industry to help people manage sort of their mental health and just general well-being and all that kind of stuff.
I sort of honed it into artist managers, talent managers.
Right.
So there's something particularly about that relationship, which is can be challenging. Yes, but I'm also an ordained interfaith minister.
Wow.
And
when did you fit that in?
Oh, fucking hell. I don't know. I don't even know how it happened, to be honest.
Really?
But yeah, I did fit it in. It was 2 years of quite intense spiritual digging, which was actually really fucking hard work and painful. But what I got out at the end of it was, I don't know, kind of like an inner authority, as if to say it's okay to, it's so fucking cheesy. It's okay to be me. It's okay. I don't have to do it perfectly.
Yeah.
Take what you've got, and offer it to the world. And if they want it, great. If they don't, great. It's okay.
Yeah.
Imperfect, perfectly imperfect, or whatever the saying is. Yeah. So it was more about an inner work really than what I ended up doing after it.
I think this kind of lockdown is a little bit of a journey for everyone as well, isn't it? Because all of the things, we in the West, we have a real propensity to kind of focus on busyness and just doing stuff and getting stuff done and having a pile of things that we've achieved at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And there's so much more to life than that. And being forced to stop being busy all the time is it, you know, it obviously opens cans of worms if you're storing them up. But I think it's a really good thing to give us all pause to just kind of chill out and slow down and appraise where we are, what we're doing, what's motivating us, and all of that kind of stuff.
No, 100%. And the thing is, a Western outlook in life is always to look at what's the material, you know, what's going on in the material world, where in fact Eastern philosophies, which are, well, the early church was split, unfortunately, into Eastern Orthodox and European, but you know, before that there was much more sort of a congruence really between the inner and the outer, even with the Christian philosophy. So what I'm interested in really is how what underpins all major religions is the essence of the same thing, which is both, which is the yin and yang, the outer, the inner, the physical and material, and the spiritual and energetic as well. And what I particularly also find exciting at the moment is this whole kind of quantum physics study. You know, the nature, you know, just the idea that atoms or molecules on a quantum level change their behaviour even by mere observation does my fucking head in. How can that be, you know? And I how does it know? You know, where's that intelligence or, I don't know, connectivity coming from? So that's when I talk about interfaith ministry, I suppose, you know, underpinning, it was just something I was interested in. Yeah. Does God exist? Who fucking knows? Does it matter? Probably not. You know, it's about how all our interpretations are going to be different anyway. It's about what gives the individual meaning. And at the moment, meaning is the most important. Having meaning in this time of inactivity, as you say, when the West is all, you know, we're so focused on the outward. When the outward is shut down, what are we left with? You know, if we haven't cultivated a sense of the inner. And of course, musicians will have a head start on this, actually, I think, because there is already a channel that they're aware of their creativity and how that becomes visible, and then how a musician then attaches themselves to it and how it comes out of their fingers or their voice. Or do you see what I mean?
Yeah. The only I agree 100%. The danger is, though, when you're in a kind of Western setting, it's kind of, how do I monetize that? And then suddenly that thing which is internal and emotional and, you know, plays with things which are intangible and non-scientific, sometimes you try and harness that in order to make the material so that you can live, I suppose. And it's a tricky balancing act, isn't it? But it's a tricky balancing act as a human being, because you're all the time trying to balance the physical and the spiritual, and the energetic, as you say. It's tricky, but asking the questions all the time and keeping on digging further down in your foundations and wondering, well, why do I believe that? And, you know, if I do believe that, what's the thing that's supporting that belief? And then just keeping on going down. And I don't think that ever ends, probably. You just keep on at it. But I think it's a worthwhile thing to pursue.
I think pardon me, there's also, monetizing art is an interesting one, isn't it? Because, you know, musicians and creatives have got to live like everybody else.
Absolutely, yeah,
so
of course.
They have to, so you know, there's an option. They don't have to at all, but if they choose to, they can. And I think there is, you know, there's the realities in the world of being able to do that. There's also opportunity, you know, in terms of opportunity, in terms of who you know, in terms of you know, and that can vary for different people for different reasons. I mean, for example, when I first realised I wanted to work in the music industry, I didn't know anybody. You know, my mum was a hairdresser, my dad's a carpenter. You know, I didn't know anyone in the fucking music industry, but I knew that that's what lit me up. You know, the idea of working it around that particular art form. So I remember my auntie's friend worked with some 70s, I can't remember who it was, celebrity, and she told me that there's this thing called Music Week. Music Week existed, and it had jobs in the back. And so if I was to get a copy of that, then I would be able to see the jobs that were advertised in the back. And so that's what I did, and then turned up at Zomba Records in 1991.
Oh, wow.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah. And got a job as a receptionist there. But, you know, I think, and that was off of sort of, you know, I remember my sixth form A-level tutor said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to work in the music industry. And she said, well, that's not a good idea. That's and there's lots of people that are going to be wanting to do that. So probably better you go for something else. But there was definitely in me something that thought, well, if everybody thought that, then nobody would do it. So it must be the people that ignore that and do it anyway.
Yeah.
And I think, and so that's what I went with, really. And I think in terms of monetising art, I think it's, you know, I definitely think there has to be a sense of that it's an abundant universe. You know, we live in London. There's tons of money in London. There's tons of money in the UK, you know, and I think what can be quite self-sabotaging for some people is this idea of it being a cruel, punishing universe that is full of lack and judgmental, you know. And I think for me, the kind of spiritual, interesting spiritual piece there is about turning you know, challenging those ideas and thinking, well, perhaps maybe if it wasn't, you know, what if it wasn't? What if the universe actually had had my best interests at heart? What would happen if I was to move forward without fear, in faith, if you like?
Suspending my cynicism.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. So a lot of the spiritual, psycho-spiritual counselling that I do with artists now is around that, which I really enjoy, actually.
Yeah. And so going back to the Zomba Records thing, and you said you felt a real drive to be in. Can you put your finger on or crystallize what it was? What was that drive? It's really difficult, and I'm not sure that I could articulate exactly what it is that has driven me to end up doing whatever I'm doing. But can you kind of explain that a little bit, or have you thought about that? You know, what was the drive? Where was it coming from?
I didn't want to be like my mum.
Okay.
So she's a post-war child. So you know, I'm 48, so I'm 2 generations away from women not having proper jobs or careers. You know, so there was a sort of bind between her telling me that I could do anything that I wanted to do, which obviously wasn't the messaging she got in the 50s. But also the bind of that's not what she did. Right. So it's about you know, it's about me being able to do whatever I put my mind to, but not having, unlike my son, the observation or the experience of my mother going out and doing things because she loves doing them.
Yeah.
Also, I think I've always been a bit strong-willed and a bit, you know, can border on arrogant sometimes. You know, that's one of my sort of character defects, if you like. You know, I can be a bit of a fucking know-it-all.
Matt and I both have daughters, which you could be describing to a T, one of whom I can see right at this moment torturing her little brother.
Yeah, so I suppose that, there's good and bad, isn't there? The yin and yang. On the negative side, I can certainly perceive myself, and I expect lots of people have thought, arrogant, bossy, domineering. But on the flip side of that, it is drive and determination and not taking no for an answer, if that's something that I really feel connected to and believe in.
Yeah.
And why did you feel that the music industry was something that you were connected to and you believed in? Was there like a moment, or was there a period of time where you suddenly felt really connected to music? Like, I don't know whether you play any instruments or anything like that, or whether it was just through listening to music, or what's the deal with that?
My dad was in a band in the 60s.
Ah, cool. Okay.
So my dad has always played guitar, and I used to sit at his knee, and he used to play guitar and make up songs about people in our family, which used to be really funny. Mm-hmm. And the only art in our house, both my mum and dad are from council estates, so it was very hand to mouth for them. Yeah. So when I was growing up, the only art in or books, art or literature or anything was LPs in my dad's. My dad used to make louder speakers as well in the 70s. So he always, they were all his LPs, and they were all 60s albums and some classical albums. And that was the only sort of high art form, if you like, that I had access to. Mm-hmm. So I suppose, there weren't any books or maps or anything else. So that's probably why.
That was the channel for creativity and art into the house, and therefore that's what you gravitated towards. Yeah. Okay.
So going from when you got your job as a receptionist, I mean, what was the journey from sort of? I mean, obviously, loads of stuff went on, but from sort of there to now, I mean, how did you get from a receptionist to then managing, and from then to doing what you're doing now and all that kind of stuff?
So I was at Zomba for a couple of years. Then I was a PA. In the 90s, that's all the jobs you could get. If you were a girl, you were on reception and someone's secretary, and if you were a boy, you were in the post room, and then became a, I don't know, A&R scout or something. There was sort of entry points. So I was someone's PA or secretary. I went from there to a tour promoter, flying music. Then I went to Concord Artists, who were a booking agent, and they did the Prodigy and E17 and a whole bunch of pop and cool stuff. And then I did a stint around most of the major labels through Handel, who are a recruitment agency. And then just as I was about to get offered a junior product manager's job at Warner's, I decided that actually I wanted to do artist management. I felt like my political colours would be more steadfastly pinned to the plight of the artist than the plight of the sort of corporate major. Corporate major. So then I worked for a guy called Alex Rear, and he managed a band called Elka, signed to Ireland. And then my husband was picked up by the manager that I was working for, Ben and Jason. So they were signed to Go Beat. A band called Delicote signed to Go Beat. So I did that for a bit, and then I worked for a large management company called Network, a Canadian company. Then Razorlight. I worked for Roger Morton, who was Razorlight's manager. He was an NME journalist, picked up Johnny.
Okay.
Didn't have much experience in running a management company, but I kind of knew how to do that. So he and I worked together on that. Andy Burrows left, who was the songwriter, and asked me to go with him, which caused much furore, as you can imagine. And then we parted ways, and then I had my son, who's 10. So that was 10 years ago. And I thought, can I really do this artist management thing? Do I really give a shit anymore? You know, I've got a real baby now. I just don't have it in me, you know. Stop me if I'm going into too much detail.
No, it's all good.
Okay. So then I knew a whole bunch of, I thought, right, I can't do that, but I need to earn money. I'm quite artistic. I've always found that it comes quite easily to me. I thought, right, I know what I'll do. I'll train as a makeup artist. Then I'll get all the people in, you know, marketing departments at major labels to employ me to be a makeup artist. And some of them did, and it was great. And I was not bad at it, you know, and I did that for about 3 years. And inevitably ended up doing, you know, did quite a lot of caretaking, let's say, for the artist that I worked for. You know,
caretaking in what terms?
Emotional caretaking.
Right, okay.
Because, of course, I neglect to mention that all the way through this story, in parallel, is my addiction recovery story as well.
Okay.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. So
do you want to crack that open, or is that another chapter?
Oh, well, just in relation to the career story, what's really important, equally as important, is, you know, is the idea that when I was 28, I was absolutely cracked open by the grief and torment of my best friend being a crack and heroin addict. You know, so she was she's fine. She's in recovery. She's been recovered for a long time. But at that time, it was very, very dark. So I ended up phoning the National Drugs Helpline and saying, I can't stop her. I think she's going to kill herself.
Yeah.
And I don't know what to do. And it would have been bad for me to have done that. I'm quite resourceful, you know. Yeah. So the idea that I'd phone a fucking helpline of people I didn't know, you know, that just sort of demonstrates how desperate I was, really. Yeah. Anyway, they put me in touch with, because I was living in Queen's Park at the time, they put me in touch with a meeting for family and friends of addicts. And little did I know it was a 12-step meeting, like AA.
Okay.
So I walked in there and everyone was talking about God. And I was like, fucking hell, what? This is not, you know, it's not about that. All that needs to happen is that my best friend needs to stop taking heroin and then I'll be fine. Honestly, I'll be fine. If she does that, I'll be fine. Not really realising there was a reason that I chose somebody with the propensity anyway for addiction as my best friend at 19. Yeah. You know, these things don't come out of nowhere. We don't find ourselves in relationship with people for no reason. You know, this is the beginning of this story happened way back in my childhood, and actually in my mum and dad's and their parents as well. There's a sort of generational addiction thing going on. So, yeah, you know, the very real fact was that if I didn't hand my will and my life over to the care of a higher power, then I was going down the fucking tubes. So that's what I did. Hence the 15-year later exploration into my spiritual life through the ministry training. So that didn't come out anywhere, you know.
And on the addiction thing, I mean, I don't want to, you know, this is the first time we've not quite met. So I don't want to, you know, probe where I'm not wanted.
Come on, Steve.
If I can say that.
We've gone way beyond that now. Let's not talk back.
You're right. I'm rolling up my sleeves. So on the addiction front, was that was something that you kind of went down into on your own addiction? You're saying that you became addicted to something and then you had to rehab from that. Is that That's what you were saying?
Well, no, not quite. I don't think. I think what I'm saying is that I became addicted to someone else's drug and alcohol addiction.
Right.
It's called codependency.
Right. Oh man, that's completely bonkers. That's exploded my head.
Yeah, and who knew, right? Who knew? I remember walking down Salisbury Road to Queen's Park Tube Station, and somebody from the meeting saying, "You do know you're an addict, though, don't you?" And no. I can, God knows I used drugs and alcohol. But I could always get up in the morning on Monday and go and do, there's a vast difference between using drugs and alcohol and being an addict. An addict is a mental, physical, spiritual illness. It can kill you. That is not what wasn't my problem. What was killing me, perhaps not physically, or perhaps eventually it would have done, but with stress, but certainly my soul felt like it was dying, because I thought if I was just clever enough, smart enough, good enough, I'd be able to save her.
Yeah.
And I couldn't. And so therefore the whole construct of my personality became
it became rocky, because your kind of what you'd built your life around was, this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to do it. This is the strategy. This is the 5-point plan. This is the first step, second step, third step. And then I achieve it. Okay, I'm still me. Everything's cool. Next. And then suddenly you ran up against something which you couldn't do it. And therefore, that foundation that we were talking about before, that suddenly started to crumble. And then you were like, what's going on?
100%. That's 100% right. It's ego collapse. In spiritual terms, it's ego collapse. It's a death. We've just come past Easter, and I love that kind of whole notion of, the whole Jesus on the cross, dies, rise again. My personal feeling, Jesus didn't do that to save us. I think that's not how I see it. I like to look at it in a much more the way the mystics would look at it, which is it's symbolic of every single journey. The journey that every single human being has to go through in life, which is at some point they will face their edges. They will face something insurmountable, even if it's death at the end, our actual death. But if not before that, actually, if we're lucky before that, we will come smack up against something which we cannot do anything about.
Yeah.
And suddenly you then have to face the fact of how fucking powerless you actually are.
Hence or not hence, but the situation that we find ourselves in at the moment. We think we can control our surroundings, we can control everything, and then suddenly you find, actually, I can't even control my health, and I can't go outside of my house. So, we're confronted with the reality that we actually, to a degree, are lying to ourselves on lots of levels. Just because we're at liberty to do certain things in certain ways for an extended period doesn't mean that we're in control of it. It just means that our liberty is correlating with our, incorrect belief that we're in control of it. But it's not that. It's just that we happen to be able to do that at that point. Yeah. Whereas when you come up against a situation like we're at the moment, you have to think about the fact that maybe what I thought was true isn't true, and I need to think about what the truth is in the situation, rather than what I would like it to be. And if I say that to myself enough times, and nothing changes, then that will be the truth. But the truth is absolute, and the coronavirus will get you if you're if you're in a place where it is, and it might not kill you, but it's going to infect you, and it's going to cause problems to you, and that's an absolute truth, and we can't get away from that. But we're not used to confronting that, I guess, and so that's another thing which is probably useful for us as the West to think about.
I think it's the good. I mean, obviously, the whole situation is horrid, and there is lots of people going through incredibly painful, hard times and all that. But aside from that, there kind of is a positive, which is, I mean, I'm communicating with people more than I would do when the world was as it was. And I think people kind of are having to deal with stuff. The people that you live with, you're there with them a lot longer. So there's things, again, you're working through stuff and realizing that your partner hums all day or something like that, which can be annoying, but then you realize that it's part of them and you have to accept it. And it's just dealing with all these little things that you can't get away from. I mean, there's a beauty in that. It's going through that journey, no matter how small it is. It's still a journey of going from one place to another. And I'm really fascinated in the thought, like, how are we going to be spat out the other side of this? I really hope that we come out the other side better for it. Being more aware, having better relationships, being more open, just talking more, communication. It's that talking, which, from a mental health point of view, the thought of a conversation is the hardest part. The actual conversation itself is just a conversation. As soon as you start talking, you realize that people want to listen. People have stories, there's stuff going on. And as soon as you isolate yourself, then that's horrid. So it's just like that connection thing, which is, I think, sorry, I rambled on a bit then, but I think that is a positive that will hopefully come out of this situation. Well, I hope it will come out of this situation.
I think it's a decision to take positives forward, though, and to remember lessons that you can learn, and also to use the time to try and think about lessons that you ought to learn as well, because we're very good as a species at kind of forgetting stuff quite quickly. So we need to be mindful of thinking about how we're living our lives, and also, probably writing it down so that you can refer back to it, because otherwise it does just fade into history, and you get back on the treadmill again. And I've certainly been thinking a lot about how I'm living my work life, and that things probably need to change to a degree. I can't spend the hours that I have been spending grinding away. I still want to be productive, obviously, and I'm trying to run a business, so I've got to do what it takes. Like, going back to monetizing art, if you can call guitar amps art, it's but it's you can't turn it into, you can. If you turn it into an industry, then the soul kind of escapes from it, I think. And when you're just grinding away at something for the sake of a paycheck, then I don't think it's sustainable. It's really difficult to sustain that. And I've certainly known people in bands, one in particular, who said to me, he felt like a puppet on stage, because that he wasn't really allowed any sound on stage. So all of the guitar amp stuff was coming off stage, and there was quite a lot of track playing. And so he just felt like he was going up on stage and sort of miming every night for the sake of everyone getting paid. And, that is a danger. Where's the expression in that? There isn't any expression in that. And at that point, you're an actor in a play that you've created but don't have any kind of sway over anymore, which, none of us can sustain that, I don't think. And obviously there are ways to inject creativity into whatever you find yourself doing. But it's about how you approach it. And I think my approach has not been what it needed to be, needs to be. And so hopefully I can change things up a little bit, and help it become more an expression rather than just grinding away at the mill.
I think I think there are things that are happening on the macro micro level, aren't there? I mean, literally, if you look at the Earth, I think there's like so much less pollution, isn't there, when the space rockets have been looking down and satellites have been looking down and actually seeing how the Earth is. The dolphins swimming in the Venice Canal.
That's amazing.
It touches, it's truly touching, isn't it? The removal of ourselves, and so very quickly things start to, that whole idea of homeostasis, the whole globe is, you just leave it to repair, give it a little bit of a chance, and it can make itself better, like our bodies, so there's that, but there's also there's also the sort of inner and outer, it's I go back to, kind of have to go back to the yin and yang, the male, the female, the black, the white, the opposites, and being in balance. And there has to be balance. And just the idea, actually, that you don't have to do much in order for the balance to be restored. In fact, the withdrawal of our activity on the globe the balance is starting to correct itself. I mean, God willing, that's going to last, like you say, I don't want to go back to what was normal before. Normal before was fucked up. We need to go into a new, there needs to be a new world order, yes. And fuck knows what that looks like, but it can't be what it was before. But there's also the sense in kind of the recovery circles, and mental health and well-being that, sometimes you've just got to get out of the way of your own success or your own path to creativity. All this self-sabotaging that we can do because of our dodgy belief systems, either that we've inherited from our family of origin or that society has bestowed on us, So to kind of try and sieve through that is a really good activity. And I think unless you come up against in life something that forces you to do that, you've got to be in pain to do that, actually. You've got to be in some kind of financial, physical, spiritual, emotional agony to have to challenge your own thinking. And of course, the whole COVID-19 lockdown thing is, for those of us lucky enough to take advantage of it. There are some that aren't. But for those that are, we would do well really to look at what we can take from this, what the mirror has reflected in us.
Yeah, definitely.
What we might not like. Oh, I don't know if I like that. What can I do about that?
And I think that's the problem. The problem is that, like, as you say, all of these kind of reflections and asking questions are really hard and unpleasant. And when things are kind of going along and you're comfortable, although maybe you're not comfortable in a holistic sense, but if you're materially comfortable, then you're not, unless you're inclined for some reason, whatever that I can't think of a reason, but unless you're inclined to start asking questions that are uncomfortable of yourself, then you're not going to ask them. And I can't remember why I started saying this. What am I talking about?
It makes sense though.
And that's why maybe we need to be accountable to friends, family, about, going forward. We need to be asking difficult questions of ourselves. And if somebody sees a destructive pattern of behavior in our lives, maybe we need to take the difficult step of saying, okay, well, if you see me doing something that you think is self-destructive or hurting other people, then every week, let's sit down, have a coffee, and we can discuss things. And that's a big step to take, and it's frightening. But I think we could probably...
Community. It requires us to be in a group, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
A family group, a work group, a 12-step group, a group therapy group, in a band, a touring group, whatever. You cannot do this. We cannot spiritually recover from anything unless we're in with other people. We can't do it ourselves. We are, as Jung says, your shadow wouldn't be your shadow if you could see it. We can't see our shadow. That's just how we're made. Yeah. We need other people to be, maybe not my husband, I don't know, when I'm annoying him, he will scream at a character, an aspect of my shadow self to myself, like, you're so fucking lazy. Whenever you make a cup of tea, you never make me one. You always make yourself one. That's obviously, there's a selfishness in my shadow, which obviously kindly lets me know about. But, what I think you're talking about, Steve, is actually having a sort of gentle, honest and safe conversation with each other about, checking in with each other about what might be knocking around in our shadow that perhaps is self-sabotaging for ourselves and also has a negative impact on the group that we're in. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
It's kind of a bit brutal, but it was one of the most liberating things I ever did. I asked my wife to tell me what was basically fucking off about me, like things that she, just
brave man.
So she was like, didn't really want to do it. She was like, it might, fuck things up or whatever. But she went out for a drink with the girls and then came back, and I was like, so do you want to talk about it? And she did. And it was. I literally just had to sit there. I didn't react to anything, and it just took it all on. And it was the most liberating thing that I have ever done, because from that moment on, it was kind of, all of it was said. There was no kind of niggle in the back of the brain that, did I do this right, that wrong, whatever. And I could make myself move forward and try and fix that stuff, It was brutal though, but I think being that sort of honest and sort of really quite granular can really sort of help. I mean, it's helped us connect, it's kind of like a line was drawn, and it's been really good going forward. We're a lot more open with each other, just generally, so you don't get to the point that you're getting annoyed at, how someone stacks a dishwasher or something. So yeah, I think being more honest, being more open, I mean, it can only lead to better things. Definitely did for me. It stung a little bit. You were going to do it, weren't you, Steve?
Yeah. Well, I'm doing, I don't know whether it's better or worse. It's probably worse. So Deb and I are doing like a marriage meditation thing. We started off strong in January, and we've become less and less good at doing it every day. But it kind of probes into the relationship of marriage and what it ought to be, and what we ought to be to one another, and what we ought to be to our kids, and all of that kind of stuff. And it has brought quite a lot of things to the surface which have been unpleasant to talk about in the moment. But I think on the whole, it's been really positive, because, after 17 years of marriage, there are some things that have remained unsaid, and that's not really a good thing. In a marriage, you've got to be able to talk to your spouse about, you've got to be able to talk to them about everything, really, if it's going to impact your relationship. And so far in 17 years, I don't think I've come across anything in my life which hasn't impacted my marital relationship. So you've got to be able to be honest, and also have conversations often. Because when it builds up, that's when you have your own internal monologue going on about, oh, why don't they do this? Have you actually said anything about that? No, but they should just know. And then why don't they just stop stacking the dishwasher like that? It's getting really annoying 15 years later. And really all it needs is a simple conversation. And then at least, even if there's a disagreement, you know, you've kind of got it off your chest, and hopefully it's not still going around in your head for you to build it up into something which it need not be.
When you're talking to managers and artists, because it is a very, well, you're working really, really closely together. So are there any kind of really common things that pop up that need to be dealt with?
Well, not dissimilar from what you're talking about what we're talking about in terms of shadow, in terms of that's annoyed me for 15 years, and why do you keep doing that? It's about relationship. You know, and the thing about artist or talent and manager relationship is that there is so much that is unsaid or unknown or in everybody's shadow. There are a manager's role can be very parental, and so there can be a lot of projection from the artist or talent onto the manager about you're looking after me, you're not looking after me, you're a good enough mummy or daddy, or you're evil and wicked and I hate you. You know, so we get a very strong imprint when we're growing up in a very early years about, you know, the archetypal mother, father, who are in fact our universe, until we realise that they're not. So therefore, authority figures, you know, one's boss, or you know, the police or the government, or you know, will be a replacement for or a receptacle for to put all the feelings that we have about authority, which is really about the feelings about what we had about our father. And then, you know, or mother, you know, the way we were parented, the way they had their relationship with one another. So there's a lot of factors at play, and I think it can be very beneficial to work out what actually belongs in the relationship and is real, present today, and what we're actually pulling around, you know, in our sack of parentship that we might be pulling out every now and again and going, and another thing about when you took my kid when I was 5, but not actually realising that this is a hall of mirrors, you know, this is, you know, we're slipping in and out of what is reality anyway. That's another podcast. But, you know, you know, what appears to be real and what appears to be present isn't necessarily the case. You know, it can be ancient, as they say, you know, it can be... So to unpick that sort of spaghetti mess is quite a good thing to do, useful thing to do, particularly if people have generally good feelings towards one another and they don't know. It's not unlike marriage counselling in a way, but I'm interested in that relationship, which is where I've gone to do most of my work. So I do like a mental health and wellbeing service for YMU Music, so they're managers, and I really enjoy that because that's I feel like I bring something that is of interest and of service to those guys in the role that they're doing, because really, unless you've worked in art, I mean, it's like any industry, I guess, isn't it, any role, but there's something about being in very close proximity with people that are often got quite a lot of issues, you know, that can be quite challenging, upsetting, fucked up, unhealthy, let alone the notion at the moment of, you know, ethical, moral responsibility to artists. You know, where does my responsibility as a manager end and the artists begin? Which is interesting, you know, because they're adults.
Yeah.
You know, but I think actually determining that before, probably at artist manager contract stage, is probably a good idea, rather than not say anything about it at all. And then, which is a bit like, you know, it's a bit like... this government has probably known for some time that a pandemic will happen. It was just a case of when. So why we didn't sort all this stuff out, we could have done, we didn't, and that's okay. Sort of, not really. But if we had have done, then we would have gone through the process already.
Yeah.
Of what to do if an artist is, develops an addiction, or an artist or a manager insists on an artist doing something that he has absolutely no ability to do and could end in suicide, frankly. And to say I didn't know, it's not okay. It's not good enough.
Yeah.
It's duty of care means that these things need to be thought about in advance, I think. But you know what? We didn't really know that before. Not really. What were we doing in the 70s and 80s? Get your tits out, love. That's Dick Emery. 90s, taking loads of pills. It's just where we never really considered it, did we?
No. So my dad worked. I used to work in kind of the football world, but in stadium management side. But he had loads of stories. Just they footballers sort of in the 80s, 90s, even noughties, they'd be injured, but forced to go out. So then, a couple of years later, I mean, you hear about it all the time with sports people, especially back in the day, like forced to do that job, and then they fuck themselves, and then it's just a downward spiral because they can't do the one thing that they've spent all their life doing. And what the hell do they do? It's a crazy thing. Responsibility.
It is, yeah. It is, but I think certainly there's a move towards any of the kids that I speak to now at ACM or the music colleges, they're far more clued up about this than I ever was, or we were.
Yeah.
Thank God. So it isn't going to be profit or die. I just don't think we're moving in that direction. I think we're moving away from that direction, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it seems to be almost going back where, because so many people, you can make music and get it out there so much easier nowadays, and lots of people are doing we were speaking to Charlotte Hatley the other week, and she was saying how albums aren't really. They're not as many now. I mean, it's people want stuff really quick just because of the nature of streaming and all that kind of stuff. So it's like EPs, lots of singles, all that kind of stuff. But rather than there being, there's always going to be a few people right at the top making tons of money, or the most. But that sort of bracket where you can actually make a living, maybe that's getting wider. I don't know, but just because
maybe
the world now, you can pretty much reach anybody if you're persistent enough. There's people on social media has kind of changed everything. So it's gone. I use the analogy a lot. It's like when it's kind of gone back. Weirdly, it's gone back to how it used to be. So you lived in a village, you went to one butcher's, his name was Dave, and he knew you and what you liked, and could give you tips on how to cook your pork or whatever, I don't know. But there was that concept.
My husband's dad's a butcher, so that obviously, I don't know. Three generations of butchers, he's the first musician.
Nice.
Wow.
But has he got any skills?
No, he has. He's great on the barbecue. But you're right. You're talking about local community.
Yeah, but now it's global. So rather than being forced, you've got a load of, say, 100 people to pick 3 people that you might have the same mindset with. Now there's billions worldwide, and all you need to do is find people that kind of like the same things that you do. And there's loads of communities out there, and I think because it did get really negative, and there are some like forums and things where people like to get on their high horse and everything. But I think generally, as long as you generally it's quite can be quite a safe, nice place. I mean, there's still obviously some.
You always get trolls.
Yeah, you always do, but I think most people are nice. The problem is that the arseholes have the biggest voices, and you know, so you've just got to find those people, find the people you want to hang around with. It's like I had to, like, I had a proper breakdown a couple of years ago, a bit longer than that, maybe even longer than that. I don't know. Time
just after you met me.
Yeah, strange that. I remember, like, I felt the lowest I've ever felt. I mean, in the fact where got the bus home back in the day when you could get the bus, and I met a mate of mine. He was coming out of the tube station. I was getting off the bus, and he looked at me and he was just like, "You all right, man?" I was just like, I couldn't be anywhere. I was just like, wanted to get away, and I just made some bullshit excuse, and went off. And it was that point. I've kind of gone off to what I was getting at, but it was that point of sort of hitting that rock bottom. And then he sent me a text like an hour later, and it was just simple as, you know, dude, it's if you fancy a pint sometime, I'm here. It was like one of those kind of messages. But I had a load of, that was it. It's auditing your friend group. So it's like people like that are good to have around, because they see, I mean, they get on with their general stuff. They're not in your face all the time, but they people that want to see you win, do better. And I had a lot of people around me. Well, actually, no, not a lot of people. There was a few key people that whenever I was in contact with them, it was just negative stuff. Everything was bad. There was no upside. And I think for somebody, especially somebody with my kind of brain, I spend so much energy trying to keep myself up. If you've got somebody pushing you down, that's horrible. So again, it's like that. If you can find that group of people that support you, and it's, you know, they just want you to do well, and they're like happy for you if you do, and you want them to do well, and want to work together. There's no kind of, I mean, yeah, there'll be niggles and stuff, but that's just people. But if you've got extra pressure weighing you down, that's a bad thing. So get rid of all that and just find the nice ones, basically.
Be discerning. It's about whose company you keep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's pretty
important. You know, if you find yourself around too many negative influences, then know that you've chosen them to be around.
Yeah.
You know, this doesn't happen by chance.
Yeah.
You know, they're reflecting something, you know, in us. Yeah, I mean, there's also this other thing called trauma bonding as well. You know, people can feel safe with like-minded souls, but they might be bound by their wounding as opposed to their healing.
Yeah.
I guess that's unsurprising, because you are almost bound by experience. So maybe bound by shared experience. So if you have an experience which is common, it doesn't necessarily have to be shared. So if you have a common experience of trauma, then that's something you will have in common and you'll bond over. And therefore it's unsurprising that you may gravitate towards people with similar trauma to yourself.
Yeah, 100%. We like familiarity, don't we? You know, whether it's good familiarity or bad familiarity, that it's still familiar and therefore safe.
Yeah.
In inverted commas, yeah.
And also that people with shared experience to you you'll just have a kind of a rapport that you wouldn't necessarily have with someone who hasn't gone through similar things to you. And it's therefore easier to be around them, because you kind of know where each other are coming from, to a certain degree in certain aspects of life, just because of that shared experience that you have. And so, like you say, it's easy. It's a comfort thing. You don't have to explain why you said that, or why you think that, or why you're a bit down, or whatever. The other person just knows, because they know that large chunk of where your personality has come from.
But then there's that whole thinking of sort of becoming comfortable being uncomfortable, which is that's what you've got to do to grow, isn't it, really? I guess you've got to, if you're always in your safe space, I mean, you'll be safe and you'll just roll around during life.
Listen, my safe space is under the fucking duvet.
That is a good safe space.
I swear to God, it's an effort for me. Not every day, but some days it's an effort just to get, because it just feels too frightening. So quite often, in terms of mental health stuff, I have to, make a concerted effort to create safety for myself. I don't wake up every morning feeling safe. In fact, I hardly ever wake up in the morning feeling safe. To a varying degree. So I identify with what you're saying, Matt, for sure, yeah.
And so what do you do when you wake up on a day like that? Do you have any kind of practices that you go through? Yes, you do.
100%. Journaling, I do most days. So I just put the date at the top of an A4 spiral pad and start with I feel. Because it's and what I find is that the connection between the pen and the paper happens almost automatically. There will be a sentence that appears that I don't feel like I've had much cognitive input into. So I try and avoid I think, I feel. So I start off with I feel. I have to exercise. Because if I don't, I will feel miserable after about 7 days. I can probably go for, and then my mood starts to. I take citalopram, so I've taken that for 15 years, which is FSRI for anxiety, not depression, anxiety. So yeah, medication, journaling, exercise. I'm in recovery, so also in recovery for compulsive overeating and compulsive spending. So I've got a whole bunch of people, my recovery community, that I can phone and say, "Fucking hell, I feel terrible," and then it'll be why. I don't know, because blah blah blah, and I might, so outreach. Going to meetings, recovery meetings. I have therapy. I've got a coach. I've got quite a raft of supportive. Otherwise, I wouldn't be. If I haven't got anything in my store cupboard, therapeutically, spiritually, or energetically, I can't go and serve others in the way that I do in my work. I have to have it full. And if it's getting depleted, then I have to be really mindful of that. Otherwise, if I start giving out, borrowing, and giving out without replenishing, then I go into my codependent mode, which will invariably end up with, after all I've done for you, you treat me like that. I can't believe, the resentment. But actually, I've chosen to do that. It's not the other person taking something from me that I didn't offer.
Yeah.
I can't moan about it if I'm offering it and someone takes it. Well, of course they're going to take it. But did I have to give? That's the point, isn't it?
So it's almost as simple as a bank account. If you're at zero and you lend someone 50 quid and then they are mean to you, you're like, now I'm in debit because of you. Well, I didn't ask you to lend me 50 quid.
Exactly. And I can easily drop into that space, which is, going back to the beginning, which is why I ended up believing that I was somehow responsible for saving somebody else that had a drug problem. Because I thought it all started, I was the alpha omega, I was God.
Yeah.
I was responsible for everything and everybody. And if there was something going on that wasn't okay, then I mean, yeah, it's incredibly arrogant as well, of course, to think that you have that level of responsibility for other people when you fucking don't. But it's you know, it's an addictive thinking behaviour.
Mm. Wow. We're actually coming up to our record limit on this thing. So.
No.
But man, that was really cool.
We could go on for about 20 episodes, I think.
I think so, yeah. But yeah, Sam, thank you so much for coming on. It's been wicked. And we had a phone conversation like 6 months ago or something, and that went on for about this length of time as well. So yeah, it's always a pleasure. But yeah, thanks for sharing. That was really, really cool. And
and let's do it in kind of physical bodies.
Hey.
When this thing finishes, let's get together. It'd be lovely to actually meet you properly. And yeah, it's been lovely talking to you, and thanks for being so honest and frank.
Oh, my pleasure. Been really, really good hanging with you guys as well. Actually, a good laugh, isn't it?
yeah,
It has.
Not too scary.
No, it's wicked. It's really good. Thank you for having me.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. Well, I will sign off.
Yeah, man.
Say hi to Ben for me. And yeah, thank you.
I'll see you
Until
guys
next time.
soon.
Yeah. Take care.
Cheers, Sam. See ya.
Bye.
And we're done.